Take a look at this map. This is a map of the town of Rhodes in Red Dead Redemption 2. You've got the buildings outlined here, we've got the main street running down the middle here, and then there's this railroad track down here that the town is built around. When I was walking around this town the other day, I noticed something really cool. There are tons of electrical wires going all over the place, and it seems like every single building in the town that has electricity is actually literally connected to a wire. So I took some time and I mapped out all of those wires here, and as you can see, they basically just run down the entire length of the main street, connecting to any building that they need to along the way. This is a pretty incredible level of detail, but it's not totally unexpected from a game studio like Rockstar Games. But then I kept following the wires and I realized something. At both ends of this line, the wires connected to a totally different set of wires. And that set of wires ran along the entire length of the train tracks, extending out in both directions further than I could see. So naturally, I started following those wires as well, eager to see if the city of Rhodes was perhaps connected to some kind of wider electrical grid. I also started to wonder if there even would have been a wider electrical grid all the way back in cowboy times, but that's we'll figure that out later. The wires ran south for a while, crossed the river into the humongous city of Saint Denis, eventually joining an incredibly dense mess of wires that ran through an industrial area before ending up here, crammed through the top floor window of the Lannick Electrical Company building. Now, on its own, this is awesome. This shows us that a totally separate town in Red Dead Redemption 2 is physically connected directly to a power company in the biggest city in the game. Rockstar didn't have to do this. Nobody would have noticed, but they did do this. And that makes me wonder, what else did they do? Are all of the buildings in every single city connected to this electrical grid? Are all of the cities on the entire map connected together, even the ones like Valentine all the way across the continent? Well, unfortunately, there's only one way to find out. We've got to map the entire electrical grid of the entire game. So that's what we're going to do. And anyone who maps power lines knows that you can't do it without the support of your favorite YouTube sponsor, MeUndies. Welcome to the sponsorship. Here at Any Austin, we are big fans of MeUndies. The greatest underpants in the world is what we call them. And I'm not lying to you when I say that I literally did wear my MeUndies while mapping out the entire power grid of Red Dead Redemption 2. The thing that's great about MeUndies is that they're easy to sell because all I have to do is say this. Do you need underpants? Great. These are the best ones. Now, personally, I've only ever worn their boxers and boxer briefs, but they've got other products, including bras and bralettes, which I've been told firsthand are also extremely comfortable, as well as a bunch of other things you can go check out on their website. Actually, I'll tell you what I need is a bunch of new white tees. This brand that I got, they changed their fabric. So you know what? I am going to order some white tee MeUndies right now. We'll order a pack of them. And done. If you buy some MeUndies and you don't like them, you can send them back and get a full refund. No questions asked. So there's literally no risk to it. Okay, here's the part I have to read verbatim. Ready? Right now, as a listener of my show, you can get cozy and spooky. Spooky. Are they spooky? Oh, yeah, I guess they are. They've got ones with pumpkins and spiderwebs. Okay, whatever. Get cozy and spooky for less with deals up to 50% off at MeUndies.com/AnyAustin and enter promo code AnyAustin. That is MeUndies.com/AnyAustin. Enter promo code AnyAustin for up to 50% off. MeUndies, comfort that's made for fall. I know that last time we read it, it said comfort made for summer, but just relax. It doesn't matter what the season is, okay? The comfort level doesn't change as the seasons change. The slogan just changes. Everything's okay. Anyway, what were we talking about? All right, we're going to start just by mapping out every single wire in Saint Denis, which is the biggest city in the game. And I wasn't exactly sure where to start, so I just decided to start kind of down by where the electric company building was and then head east along the river. And it wasn't long before I saw my first wonderful wiring detail. Take a look at these lights underside the train depot here. The wires from the utility pole attached to this train depot sort of to like give it power, which is already a great detail. But if you look closely, you'll see that they didn't stop there. Each light bulb itself has a wire running to it, hanging underneath. Just pretty insane. In the same vein, even these random little dock buildings are connected to the grid. Additionally, take a look at this side-by-side comparison between the density of wires in GTA 5 versus Red Dead 2. They've got a lot more wires in Red Dead 2. Now, funnily enough, this makes sense on two levels. Firstly, Red Dead 2 is a newer game, and newer game equals stronger computers equals you can put more wires in the game. But also, we actually did have more wires on our utility poles in 1899 when Red Dead 2 is set than we do today. Like, way more. Here's a real picture that is not a joke picture of a town in Kansas in 1911. Red Dead 2 doesn't quite have that many wires, but it's got a lot, and it creates a great atmosphere for the city of Saint Denis. As we follow this set of wires along the train tracks, we'll find 3 different offshoots that head into the streets, and and then one main line that continues all the way around the crescent of the city. And when you head into the inner streets of Saint Denis, you can see why they need all these wires. There are just lights all over the place. And just like out by the river, the level of detail here is pretty wild. It feels like there are power lines everywhere connecting to almost every single building that they can, and the result is that the map of wires in Saint Denis ends up looking a whole lot like the map of streets of Saint Denis with a few exceptions. There are 8 dead-end points where the wires stop, and then 4 places, including 2 along the train tracks, where the wires head out into the mysterious wilderness. But beyond that, everything is connected to this grid. One funny historical detail that a lot of people forget is that back in 1899, the whole electrical grid was basically used for one thing: lights. There were some exceptions, like the streetcar in New Orleans, which Saint Denis is based off of, but the vast majority of the electrical infrastructure was just there to make the nighttime look a little bit less like nighttime. This is the entire grid of Saint Denis mapped out. Every single wire, every single utility pole. It's a pretty impressive achievement considering how it was probably the job of like 1 or 2 people at Rockstar to sit around for days and just connect stuff together with wires. And if we're going to take the environment of the game at face value, then this building, the one with the wires coming out of the window, is the source of all of that electricity. This is the power plant for Red Dead Redemption 2. The obvious question then is, what kind of power plant is it? Well, in modern times, we've got all sorts of ways to make electricity. We can burn natural gas to spin a turbine to generate electricity. We can use a river to spin a turbine to generate electricity. We can use nuclear fission to spin a turbine to make electricity. We can use wind to spin a turbine to make, see where this is going. It's mostly turbines. Or we steal it from the sun. See, that's the other option. But back in 1899, there was really only one option: coal. You burn coal to boil water, to make steam, to spin a turbine, which makes electricity. Now, the thing with coal is that unless it's really high quality coal with really efficient burning equipment, it makes a lot of black smoke. So if this building is actually a coal-fired power plant, we would expect to see huge smokestacks with black smoke coming out of them on top. You're not going to believe this, but take a look. Huge smokestacks with black smoke coming out on top. They nailed it. Absolutely incredible. There's also one other little detail here, which is where the wires come out of the window. I forgot to put this in the script, but I wanted to tell you. Out of this window, normally you can't pack a bunch of wires into a window like that unless you give each wire its own, I don't remember what they're called, insulators. But if you use a camera mod to zoom in on the window, it literally has an insulator for every single wire. It's just crazy, the amount of details. It really is. Yes, you can find things to nitpick, like how the wires on the utility poles don't actually connect across the insulators, or this funny light pole that somehow got misplaced so that it doesn't actually connect with its own wires. But man, the game's overall understanding of the aesthetics of life in New Orleans in 1899, pretty astounding. But what if we get outside of the city? Remember those offshoots that we talked about, the ones following the train tracks? I don't want to just know where the power is in the city. I want to know where all of the power lines in the entire game go. I want to know how the World Wide Web of wires is connected. I just made that up. Now, it seems pretty clear at this point that one of Red Dead 2's guiding principles when it comes to these power lines is that the power lines follow the train tracks. If we follow those train tracks out of the city going north, we'll see that they head all the way up the coast along those train tracks until they hit the northernmost city of Annesburg. At Annesburg, they go into the city, powering all the houses and buildings just like they do everywhere else, and then they come to a stop here. You can see that a few empty utility poles have been placed heading further north, which almost implies that at some point in the future they may continue developing out that way, but for now, Annesburg is the end of the line. It's not quite that simple though. Along the way to Annesburg, there are a variety of offshoots, like one that splits off to another railroad line before just coming to an end near the river, and then another offshoot goes down to the rundown city of Van Horn. I'll tell you what, I know a little something about Van Horn. The layout of Van Horn is interesting because it's mostly just a normal loop that comes off the train line, just like the other cities we've looked at, goes down through the main road, etc., and then connects back to the train line. But towards the south end of the loop, there's one little offshoot here where the power lines start to head off towards this abandoned house, but at some point you can see that the wires were cut, that they're no longer connected to the house, presumably after it was abandoned. If you go inside that house, you can actually see that while there are electric lights inside, none of them are working, and instead someone has actually lit candles to provide lighting. With this game, I really can't understand like how they just thought through so much. Insane. And honestly, I looked through a lot of the houses and buildings for this whole exercise, and I swear I couldn't find a single house that had electricity in it, but didn't have a wire running to it. Well, except one, but we'll talk about that later. There's another small offshoot just outside of Saint Denis going to a small little working area outside of the town, but for this particular line, that's pretty much it. Now, if we head to the other side of Saint Denis, remember that offshoot that we originally came in on, we can follow that back out of the city past Rhodes, and the wires continue to follow the train tracks for quite a while before eventually they hit a fork in the road. We're going to put a pin here because we will come back and explore the other fork, but let's take that first fork to the north, which eventually runs all the way to the city of Valentine. Valentine, just like Rhodes and Annesburg and Saint Denis, has electricity, and it all comes from the same grid. The main line continues east past the city into the Heartland oil fields, providing electricity to the buildings and equipment there. Then it goes further east, eventually leading to another fork. We'll take the east fork first because it's not too far along that it curves north and then comes to a stop right here along the train tracks. Now, as a fun side note, you can see that the power lines end, but the train tracks continue. I originally did my research for this video in the online mode of the game, and it's actually a little bit different. The power lines still end in the same place, but the train tracks in the online mode have not been built. And I believe the online mode takes place a year before the main game, so it's actually, there are changes made to sort of show the world evolving, which is very cool. Now back at that fork, we can head south past the Emerald Ranch. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but pay close attention to Emerald Ranch because you'll notice that there are power lines heading to the house from the grid, and yet all of the lighting at the ranch seems to be gas or candles, and none of the equipment seems to be electricity driven, which is interesting. Now, historically, this makes sense. Farms in the United States were unbelievably far behind the cities technologically, like literally decades behind. There was a report from around the time of the New Deal, so like the 1930s or something, that found that fewer than 10% of American farms were electrified, and that was in the 1930s. Red Dead is set, 30 years before that. So in the time of Red Dead 2, it would have been unheard of for a farm this far away from the city to have any kind of electricity. So how do we explain this wire? Well, there's a big piece of information that I still have to drop on you, but I can't do it yet because we have to go through the whole grid first. But that piece of information is what I think is the single biggest mistake that Red Dead 2 makes with its electrical infrastructure, and I think that mistake explains a ton about why we're seeing things like this, as well as a few other things that we'll get into later. So let's wrap up mapping the whole grid first, and then we'll circle back to this. Also, if this is your kind of video, you should subscribe. Nobody's doing it like me on YouTube. I wish more people would, then I could watch them, but I can't, so you should subscribe. Following the line south from Emerald Ranch, it crosses a lot of beautiful terrain, eventually hitting a bridge where it ends up getting wrapped around the trestle of the bridge as it goes over the swamp, which is another great wiring detail. At the end of the bridge, it goes back up on the utility poles across another river, and eventually, ta-da, we're back in Saint Denis, which only leaves one more fork that we haven't explored, all the way back over here. Now, this particular path is very cool because it kind of represents the end of the expansion of power lines up into the mountains. You follow it all the way across the mouth of this river into the forests and hills, up past Riggs Station, even further up into the wild hills until eventually you get here, Wallace Station. It's a dumpy little place that doesn't actually have any electric lighting itself, and the whole vibe is very edge of the new world. The train tracks do continue onwards up here without power lines following them, and for good measure, I decided I should follow them all the way around as well. Amazingly, they actually go all the way across the northern edge of the map and connect back to Annesburg, but there are no more power lines across the entire route. There is one peculiar little mistake though. Once the tracks get way up into the mountains, they start going through tunnels, which is a very weird and lonely vibe, and most of these tunnels are just dark and strange. But one of them, way up here in the middle of nowhere, is lit, and these lights are not gas and they're not flames. This is electric lighting in the middle of nowhere. No power lines, no wires, nothing. Now, how did this little tunnel in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains, end up with electricity? It was a mistake. And that's it. That's the entire electrical grid of Red Dead Redemption 2. Every single city connected by utility poles along the train tracks to every single building and every single light in every single town. And the power is all generated here at the electric coal plant in Saint Denis. Pretty incredible attention to detail. There's just one problem. None of this could have happened in 1899. Take a look at this picture. Old, grainy-ass picture. This is a picture of, well, you might know what it is. Power lines running along a train track in the era of Red Dead Redemption 2. Or at least that's how you interpreted it with your modern brain. But that's not what it is. These are not power lines at all. These are telegraph lines. These lines in this picture, they don't carry electric power. They carry this little beeping signal that let people communicate over long distances before we invented telephones. These lines do not, and in fact could not, have carried electrical power because we didn't have long-distance electrical lines in 1899. For the most part, there's like a couple of exceptions. They built one line from, I think, Niagara Falls to Buffalo, but aside from that, it didn't exist. Because the thing is, trying to send electricity long distances, it loses a lot of its power the longer you send it. So what you need to do is boost the power really, really high so that then you can send it a really far distance without it losing too much of its power. And then when it gets there, you can bring it lower again so it doesn't explode everybody's houses. But the problem is when you have the power really, really high like that, if it gets too close to like a tree or a ground or a person, the electricity, because it's so strong, will literally jump off of the line and like it's a lightning bolt basically that comes out and can strike a tree or cause a short, and it creates a fire. So in order to avoid this, what we do is we take that really powerful electricity and we put it way up in the sky on these transmission towers. That's why transmission towers are so tall, which means in order to send electricity long distances, you need some kind of transmission equipment, right? And we didn't really have that in 1899. And we also don't have that in Red Dead Redemption 2. What's funny about this is that in some ways, it seems like the game knows that these are telegraph lines. Remember that ranch that we talked about, how we saw a single wire connecting to the house, but there wasn't any electricity at the ranch itself? Visually, we could kind of conclude that that single wire is probably a telegraph line, which tracks with historical record. But the problem is that this telegraph line is connected directly to other wires that are clearly used for powering things. And they're also literally connected to a power plant. So that just doesn't track. And it also exposes another big error with the overall picture here. The idea that this one power plant in the city of Saint Denis could actually send power along these little power lines across the entire nation to distant towns and cities is a total and complete fabrication. It was just not possible to do this. Now you might be asking yourself, hold on, if it's not possible, how did all the cities and towns across America get electricity then? Did they just make it themselves? Yeah, pretty much. Every single town, no matter the size, if they wanted to have electricity, they had to have their own power plant. And bigger cities often needed multiple power plants all across the city to make sure that they had one close enough to every building that wanted electricity. In fact, big businesses like hotels or like theaters, they would often have their own power plants in the basements of the buildings. The streetcar line in New Orleans had its own power plant. And every single one of these power plants was burning dirty fucking coal, just dumping pitch black smoke into the sky 24/7, just so people could have light bulbs. Oh, that reminds me, the most impressive detail in this game, the greatest thing I've ever seen in a video game maybe, has to do with light bulbs. So let me tell you about that now. I did a lot of research for this video, to the point that I had to start using this program called Obsidian to basically build my own personalized Wikipedia to keep track of all the little details and historical information that I needed for this to all come together. And I discovered tons of awesome anecdotes about the history of electricity in the times of Red Dead Redemption 2. I can't get into all those things right now, but I will tell you about one of these details, okay? Picture this. By the 1890s, big cities across the world had started getting pretty comfortable with the idea of electric street lighting. It was extremely bright, relatively cheap to operate, and offered reliable lighting for important areas at night, like central business districts or industrial areas. The first lights that we used for street lighting were called arc lamps. These were basically two rods in a glass box that you shoot lightning in between, and then the lightning is so bright that it lights up the entire street. The light from these arc lamps was extremely white and blue, kind of like horrendous modern LED lights that some streets use now. So it was effective. It was really good lighting, but it wasn't pretty. It was kind of harsh. As lamp technology evolved, eventually we invented incandescent lighting, which is kind of what you think about when you think of an old light bulb. These lights were cheaper to make, they were much warmer in tone, they were more pleasant to look at, and they were quieter. By 1899, the year that Red Dead Redemption 2 is set, cities like New Orleans were in the midst of a transition from the older, harsher arc lamps to newer, more pleasant incandescent lamps. Meaning that if you walked around at night in New Orleans in 1899, you would have seen both of them side by side. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, but let me show you what the streets of Saint Denis in this video game look like when you walk around at night. This is crazy. I mean, just the level of research that it requires to not only find pictures of old streetlights and recreate them in great detail, but to actually understand the surrounding context of their use and then implement that into the game. It's truly inspiring to me. And even more so, what's great about this is that it's ugly. Having two clashing lights, it doesn't look good. If your city has ever done that thing where they're switching from incandescent to LED for the streetlights, it's not nice to see them side by side. It actually, in this context, looks less old-timey than just using all warmer incandescent lights. It's counterintuitive to put these blue lights that almost look like modern LEDs into a game set in 1899. But it's correct. It's true. That's amazing. Holy smokes. I mean, I've got goosebumps. Oh, and one more thing, sorry. You know how I told you that this was a map of the entire electrical grid in Red Dead 2? That was a lie. There's actually one more offshoot right here, all the way down here, that I hid from you. Where do you think it goes? Maybe you should take a look. I'm Annie Austin. Thanks for watching.